think our listeners will be expecting that to happen as well. Now, if we look at recent events, I'll set the scene quickly, if I may. So the resignation of Sajid Javid, the Conservative Party's highest-ranking Muslim cabinet minister, came at a time when your party is hit quite a low in its handling of Islamophobia. Let's not forget that the departing Chancellor had promised to hold an inquiry into the party's tolerance of Islamophobia, and this was supposed to start before the end of 2019. And we were told there'd be a zero tolerance to all forms of racism, but there's still no specific inquiry on the cards. And crucially, your party's failed almost 3 million British Muslims with a general investigation rather than the one all Tory leadership candidates pledged on national TV. So why has this not happened, Paul, yet?
Well, there will be an independent investigation into, as you say, hate of all kind tolerance of hate of all kind within the Conservative Party. And that's going to be chaired by Professor Singh, and he's going to report this year. And I think it's really important that inquiry is independent. It's not being run in any way by the Conservative Party. It's going to be a completely independent inquiry. Let me just say this from the start, though. I do genuinely believe that my party, the Conservative Party, needs to do more on Islamophobia.
Okay.
And I just want to be clear about that. And that's not because I believe the Conservative Party is in any way Islamophobic. It's just because we can't allow this image or this kind of perception that the Conservative Party is in any way Islamophobic to continue. Look at the Conservative Party here in Peterborough. We've got a Muslim Conservative mayor. We've got 2 Conservative Muslim cabinet members. We've got scores of Conservative Muslim councillors, activists, supporters. We do it really well here in Peterborough, and I know we do it very well elsewhere in the country. And if the Conservative Party believe in anything, Amir, if we believe in anything, we believe that it doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is, what your faith is, that if you've got the talent, the hard work and the determination, you should be able to make the most of your life. And so my party needs to go that extra step, I believe, sometimes, just to ensure that we believe, or we give the impression that we're not against any hate of any kind, and certainly not give any sort of tolerance to Islamophobia.
Yeah, it's a strong message, Paul, and I'm glad from the outset there you mentioned that your party needs to do more. Now, there's no smoke without fire. There are reported evidential facts of Islamophobic things going on within the party. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this whole hubbub about it. It does exist within the party, just as anti-Semitism exists or existed, whatever, within the Labour Party. So we can't ignore the fact that it exists. And you draw attention to Peterborough. And yes, things are done well here. There's no doubt about that at all. And other pockets across the UK. But only last week we learned that the Tory backbench MP Daniel Kozinski, forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly, but I'll go with Kozinski, he chose to travel to Italy for a nationalist far-right conference, speaking alongside figures who famously voice Islamophobic and anti-Semitic views, including the Hungarian PM. Now, Kozinski was not there to challenge, but to hear people who represent, and I quote, serious ideas and concerns, some of which are shared by many citizens of the UK. Now, his actions were met with public condemnation by religious groups and anti-racist allies, and it was only then that the Conservative Party, and I quote, formally warned him that his attendance was not acceptable. Plus, in the party's words, Kozinski had accepted this and he did apologise. But it seems CCHQ's zero tolerance policy on racism didn't extend to suspending him. Do you think he should have been suspended?
Kaczynski didn't say or mutter anything Islamophobic or anything extreme himself. You'll find across Europe this happens quite a lot because our friends across the water in Europe, some of the political parties have, how should we say it, long histories where in the past some of the extremes of European politics that we've seen, far left politics, communist politics, or politics of the far right, there are long histories associated with some of those things. And so when Conservative MPs, Liberal Democrat MPs, Labour MPs go and have relations with some of these parties, there's always going to be that long history. And it's happened on the left as it's happened on the right, especially in Eastern Europe, a lot of that as well. So this is not a new thing. And if we take the sort of view that every time a an MP goes and speaks to a conference somewhere else in the world, you will always find somebody, I would imagine, slightly distasteful at the fringes of every single party. And if that happens, then it's a race to the bottom as far as I'm concerned. But I'm pleased that Daniel Kawczynski's been warned. I'm pleased that this is in all of our minds, because language and perception matters. As I said to you, we do need to go that extra step to ensure that our party, the Conservative Party, is seen as the open, tolerant party that I know it is.
That's a fair statement, Paul, and thank you for addressing that. But obviously, in the forefront of our minds is going to be those comments, and I'm loath to bring them back, but I kind of have to, because it's there, it's out there. Is Boris Johnson's comments about Muslim women? I mean, calling them letterboxes, etc. And it's horrible just to repeat those comments. But I'll ask you a couple of questions just directly on this, because before the calls come in, hopefully. Do you think Boris Johnson is a racist?
Of course I don't think Boris Johnson's a racist. Just look at his track record when he was Mayor of London. He was Mayor of the most diverse city, the most multi-faith city, and probably it is the best capital city, as far as I'm concerned, in the world. It's a melting pot, and it shows you what can be achieved by having people of different faiths, different backgrounds, all working together to make a fantastic city. Peterborough is the same. Now, just going very specifically about this article, I believe language matters.
It does.
And as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure Boris Johnson regrets using that language, and I would hope so. And I think he's apologised for using that language. And if you recall, he wrote this when he was a journalist, and he was a journalist, and journalists all the time use colourful languages in order to try and encourage people to read their articles. But if you actually read the article, it was a liberal defence of saying women should be allowed to wear whatever religious clothing they wish. That was the point of the article. But Amir, you're quite right. Language matters. And it was wrong to use that phrase. And I know himself, he regrets that.
Okay. I mean, people will still disagree on this point, I think, to a certain extent. Language does matter. But when you are a certain individual, you have a certain stature within the national public eye, even more so you should be wary of the language you use. And I know you've just said this, but isn't it rather foolish for someone who is as intelligent as Boris Johnson, and we all know he's a very intelligent man, but someone with that level of intelligence making those sort of mistakes, it doesn't bode well for the future, does it? I mean, if he's made mistakes like that before, what's he going to do in the future?
Well, as I say, he wrote this when he was a journalist. He certainly didn't write it when he was Prime Minister. And what I would like to point out again is I agree with you. I think language matters. But the idea that Boris Johnson, who appointed, as you say, a Muslim Chancellor of the Exchequer, I know he's not there now, but that's for other reasons,
right.
But a Muslim Chancellor of the Exchequer, and was Mayor of the most diverse multi-faith city in the world, the idea that he can be a racist, well, it's just nonsense.
Okay, well, look, some have the view that your party does not truly care about being tough on racism, and it's quite a common view. And as long as you can pretend...
It's a wrong one.
Well, in your opinion, it's a wrong one. Other people will differ with you, of course. But is it a case, and I know you'll disagree with this, but some people think that it's important to the Conservative Party to look tough on racism. And there's a very key difference there, rather than...
What do you mean, look tough on racism?
Well,
I mean, I think that... I mean, if you mean look tough on racism, as in stamping out racism and stamping out hate of any kind, then that's exactly what the Conservative Party is all about. So as I said to you at the start, earlier on, Amir, the Conservative Party, if it believes anything, it believes it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, what your faith is, where you've come from. If you've got the hard work, the talent, then there is no reason you can't go as far as your ambitions, your dreams and your hopes will take you. That's what the Conservative Party at its core believes.
I accept that.
And that's why I'm a Conservative Party member and the Conservative MP for a multi-faith, multi-ethnic city like Peterborough.
I accept that, Paul. But what about the Islamophobia which has been evidenced within the Tory party? You know, we had last week we just spoke about the failure to reprimand Kawczynski, and in the past it's been defending Zach Goldsmith and his dog whistle mayoral campaign, failing to suspend MP Bob Blackman after a consistent stream of Islamophobia. Let me just finish the point, please, on social media, and not cracking down on Islamophobia among its ranks online. For example, quietly reinstating 15 councillors who were suspended over Islamophobic and racist online posts. So when the public see that and the Muslim community see that, then it's an issue, surely, for us to believe the words that you say, giving opportunity for everyone, which I understand is something you truly believe in. But when Muslims feel victimized by these issues that happen within the party, what do you say to those people?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right to challenge me on this, and I want to say something and agree with you. I thought the campaign that was ran in the name of Zach Goldsmith to become Mayor of London was distasteful at best. I think it was the wrong campaign that a Conservative Party should be running, and that's something that is not a good part of our history, and I will be open and honest to admitting that. And when I say the Conservative Party needs to go further, this is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. We cannot allow any perception that we are in favour of hate or intolerance of any kind. That's why I'm so pleased that we do have this independent inquiry that will be chaired by Professor Singh to look at these. We'll be reporting this year that we have a zero tolerance approach to hate or intolerance of any kind, and people have been thrown out of our party because of some of the things that they have done, and that's absolutely the right thing to do.
Can you think of specific examples?
That's absolutely the right thing to do. Look, you're always going to find people across the country in a party like the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, mass membership organisations where people have said distasteful things. But there is no way that you can compare this to, for example, the Labour anti-Semitism crisis, where it seems to be endemic to a few isolated incidents within the Conservative Party. We need to go further. As I keep saying, we cannot allow the perception that the Conservative Party, the oldest political party in the world, a party that believes in all the things that I've said about it doesn't matter where your background is, what you do, this is the party for you. We cannot allow that perception to build. So the Conservative Party must go further, and I agree with you.
It's very interesting, Paul, that you keep using that word perception. It's more than perception. There are hard facts out there. You don't have to dig very deep. You just Google Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, and there are facts. So to use the word perception repeatedly, I think is a little bit misleading. I don't think it is perception.
There will be examples of where isolated incidents are in any mass membership organisation that people have been found expressing intolerant attitudes, and thankfully, they have been dealt with in an independent process. They'll have been thrown out of the Conservative Party. I wouldn't be a member of the Conservative Party, the Conservative MP, if I thought for 1 second that this party had the same crisis as the Labour Party does over anti-Semitism with Islamophobia. That's not my way, and it's certainly not, as far as I'm concerned, the Conservative Party's way.
But you say that, but then I've already told you, you quietly reinstated 15 councillors that were suspended over Islamophobic and racist online posts.
Well, I would hope that those people have been dealt with through an independent process. They have had their case investigated, and then action has been taken. I'm not sure of the specific incidents that you're talking about.
Okay.
But and I wouldn't like to comment. But the Conservative Party, as I keep saying, if it believes anything, it certainly believes that it doesn't matter what your faith is, what your background is. This is the party for you if you believe that an individual's hard work, his aspiration, is what defines him.
Okay. Now, we need to talk about the very definition of Islamophobia that the government is still, frankly, refusing to accept, despite it being adopted, as you know, Paul, by all other main political parties, Muslim communities up and down the country, many local authorities, police forces, and, crucially, the top academics in the field. And that definition from the APPG on British Muslims is Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Why does your party not accept that as a definition?
Well, you and we've discussed this in the past. When we first met, you did specifically challenge me on this, and I promised to go away to look at this and come back to you.
Yeah.
And look, I can say I've looked at the APPG definition on Islamophobia, and I've looked at why it's not being accepted. And one of the reasons it's not being broadly accepted by a number of different organisations for a number of different reasons.
Right.
And because it doesn't fulfil, I think, the 2010 Equality Act.
On that point, it is non-binding, so it doesn't actually affect the Equality Act. So that's something that Baroness Warsi said just last week.
That it's not been broadly accepted. There are kind of issues and challenges associated. Even Khalid Mahmood, the Labour MP, the Muslim Labour MP, has said that there are issues relating to this definition. So that's why the government are now working with Muslim groups across the country and are working to try and create a broader definition of Islamophobia. So this is the government doing this in order to get something that everybody can get on board with, can be happy with, and we can have that definition. I think that's the right way to go.
But Paul, that work's been done. You've got cross-party, it's an all-party parliamentary group, you've got cross-party involvement, you've got academic groups, Muslim community groups up and down the country who have worked on a thick document, which I was at the launch at in Westminster, and it did beautifully capture what the problem is with Islamophobia, and the perceived Muslimness is a really crucial element. So why do you want to repeat that work?
Well, I think the government are better placed to do that work than, quite frankly, than APPG. I know how APPGs work.
Well, you're the vice chair on the Kashmir.
Indeed I am. I know how APPGs work, and quite often it's MPs' offices who has to do that work. They don't have that secretariat support. They don't have that broad reach out into different parts of the community. I know all of the country. I know many APPGs and how they work. And I think it's much better that work is conducted by the government with all the resources at its disposal to be able to bring in experts from across the country in different faith organisations, different religious organisations to work on this. And let me just, cause as I say, it's not just. There were a number of people who had concerns with that definition. Peter Tatchell's another one. There were a number of people who had concerns with that definition. So So in this work that the government are doing on a broader definition of Islamophobia, let me just say this, a pledge to you right now. I'm very happy as the MP for Peterborough to work with the Joint Mosques Council, to work with the community here in Peterborough, different individuals, different organisations, so we can feed into that process and we can get a working definition of Islamophobia, because this is really, really important.
It is.
We've seen what's happened in Germany only over the weekend. We've seen what's happened in other mosque attacks in New Zealand, and there have been isolated mosque attacks in this country.
Indeed.
Mosques are a place for sanctuary, are welcoming, and I know many of the mosques here in Peterborough have done fine work tried to open themselves up to people of different faiths, of no faith at all, so they can go and visit the mosque and find out what a warm and welcoming place they are and learn more about Islam. And I would be devastated if that work had to stop, that openness had to stop because of security concerns. I want many more school children to go to some of the mosques here in Peterborough more often than they do in order to find out that. And if that openness stopped, then that would be devastating to me personally. And the thing I fear more than anything is that we see something like what happened in Germany recently or in New Zealand here in this country. So defining Islamophobia, working to stamp that out, I think is absolutely crucial work, and I will stand shoulder to shoulder with the Muslim community in this city and across the country on doing that.
Okay, duly noted, but I do have to come back to you on a couple of points, because you know how as a station, how strongly we feel about this definition. You talked about huge resources that the government can lay their hands on. This APPG on British Muslims, they had the MCB working with them. The MCB have a huge number of a great number of individuals that work tirelessly to get into the nitty-gritty of data. I've got a report here from the CSI from Nuffield College in Oxford about British Muslims facing employment penalties because of who they are. So just going back to the point of why you want your own definition, Paul, because does it mean that your party feel that they've got the knowledge, experience and first-hand perception to decide what Islamophobia is?
No, this is not the party. This is the government who would do this. This is the government who would do this with all the assets at their disposal. This isn't the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has an independent process now in the inquiry we talked about in our earlier discussion. Yeah. This is the government we're talking about with all the assets at its disposal, and it can go out. And I'm not knocking what the APPG have done. What the APPG have done is fine work. It clearly comes with the best possible motives. It's worked with a number of organisations. But I just believe that the government is best placed, with all the assets at its disposal, I keep saying that, to do this and to get a much broader input into for this definition. I think that's the right way to go.
But do you see it from the perception, using that word again, from the Muslim community, when the party does not adopt the current definition, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Muslims out there that have an issue with that. And that lends itself to them thinking, well, if they don't want to adopt the definition, then there's obviously some fundamental underlying reason for that. And if they're not being told, it leads them to think that it might be an Islamophobic party.
Oh, well, look at us here in Peterborough. We've got a Muslim Conservative mayor. We've got Muslim Conservative councillors.
I've heard you say that many times.
The idea that the Conservative Party in Peterborough or elsewhere is Islamophobic is just nonsense. Look, for me,
with respect, I don't think it's nonsense, Paul. I
think you genuinely think the Conservative Party is institutionally Islamophobic in the same way that the Labour Party being accused of institutional anti-Semitism.
So I believe neither are institutionally Islamophobic in the Conservative Party, and I personally believe that Labour also institutionally not anti-Semitic. The point I'm coming back to, which is the point I raised before, is the perception of the party, the current government, not adopting that definition is a fundamental issue, one which is raised time and time again. And, okay, great that there's going to be a huge number of resources put towards this. When is that going to happen? Has that started? When can we expect this definition from the current government? Is there any...
Well, it's my understanding that this work is ongoing.
Okay.
I've promised here tonight to work with the Muslim community here in Peterborough to feed into that, because I think we've got a great story to tell here in this city.
I agree.
About, how we all come together and live together as one people, as one city.
Absolutely.
We've got a great story to tell on that.
Indeed.
And it would be an excellent piece of work, I think, to kind of feed into the government's definition or the government's work with community organisations on this. But it's not just, you sit there and say, oh, well, it's a perception that we give by, the Conservative Party give by not openly, enthusiastically endorsing this. But it's not. It's Peter Tatchell, it's Professor Richard Dawkins, it's Khalid Mahmood, a Labour MP a Labour Muslim MP who expressed concern about this, and it's not because that the work that's gone on with the APPG's definition of Islamophobia is any way bad. It comes from the purest of motives. It's just, I think, much better that the government, this government, whether it's Conservative or a Labour government, the government machinery does that work rather than an all-party parliamentary group.
I understand the point. It's interesting. Twice you've mentioned Khalid Mahmood, who I'm personally not a fan of, but why do you choose to mention and drill that particular person home? You mentioned he's a Labour MP, whereas before any other topic you probably wouldn't even mention Labour. Why would you choose that as a kind of powerful statement that Khalid Mahmood has rejected this definition?
Well, I'm just trying to show that it's not just the Conservative Party who's not enthusiastically endorsed this. There are other MPs who have not. There are other politicians from all parties who have problems with it. People from other organisations have problems with it. Faith groups, the UK Sikh organisation has
and the Henry Jackson Society
a problem with it. So what I'm trying to say,
Paul, and the Henry Jackson Society that we know as Muslims will have an issue with.
Well, okay. I'm pleased to see that that's news to me, and great.
I'm just trying to make the point.
But as far as I'm concerned, I think it's much better that the government, with all the assets at its disposal, do this work with a range of people, a range of faith organisations, community organisations, and get this right. Because it's really important, Amir, as I keep saying.
It is.
It's really important because, for the reasons I said earlier about the attacks that have taken place and because Islamophobia, it's the real fear about this. If it is not nailed, and we don't combat religious ignorance, then we're going to get more and more things like New Zealand, like Germany, and the last thing we want to see in the UK is that sort of attack here.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. Thank you for giving us your thoughts, opinions, views on that topic of Islamophobia. We are coming up to a break. I'll remind you of the number 01733 602 133. We're going to be joined again we'll be back in 4 minutes.
Stay tuned to Salam Radio after this short ad break.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shabina here. Has your child had their flu vaccination this year? All primary school-aged children are entitled to the flu vaccine in their schools, helping to protect you and all the family against flu, which can make vulnerable people very ill. Call the school immunisations team on 0300 555 5055 if you'd like your child to get protected.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qala an-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, innal ghadaba yufsidu al-imana kama yufsidu as-sabru al-asal. That anger ruins faith just like the aloe plant ruins honey.
Yeah, in preschool I was kind of a dork. The other kids were like, why is it you can't eat pork? I wasn't good at sports, so I never got picked. And what's up with the kebab on the rye bread? Ew, that's sick. We didn't celebrate Christmas at home, so I danced around the prayer rug in my room alone. When Amir said, beta, go pray your salah, I used to sit on the rug with a comic book on the side. I mean, life was pretty okay, a little confusing at worst. More like a blessing, nothing at all like a curse. I was a little chubby kid, so innocent, just trying to find a balance with one foot in the sink. 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 Yeah, we're striking the pose and we're trying to find a balance in the world so cold. Behold. Things got a bit more weird in high school. The kids were like, why don't you drink like the rest of us do? Here's some weed. Puff, pass. I'm okay with admitting I did things in my past that I'm not so proud of, but they were all part of my growth. Like Jay-Z said, that's one to grow with. Nope, not trying to be heroic. It's okay to be out of sync when you're trying to find a balance with one foot in the sink. 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 Yeah, we're striking the pose and we're trying to find a balance in the world so cold. Behold, behold, behold.
Listening to Peterborough's community radio, Salam Radio, 106.2 FM.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome back to Ask Your MP, the first of a brand new monthly show here on Salam Radio 106.2 FM. I'm here with Paul Bristow MP. Good evening, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
Are you enjoying it so far?
Oh, it's great. I love this sort of thing.
Good, fantastic. Well, listen, we're into the second half now. We've just finished the topic of Islamophobia. If you do want to get in touch with regards to our next topic, which is on Kashmir, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a bunch of you that will want to do this, 01733 602 133 is the number to call to come through on air and ask your question directly to Paul Bristow, your elected MP. Now, tens of thousands dead over 7 decades, 3 wars between 2 nuclear-armed states, and countless human rights violations. Kashmir continues to be the heavily occupied and militarised region with the recent spikes between India and Pakistan. So why do both countries want control over the region? Well, India claims Kashmir maintains their secular status by being the only Muslim majority region, whilst Pakistan says a majority Muslim state should naturally be part of a Muslim nation. But it's also about the water. Pakistan's only water supply is the Indus River, which happens to first flow through Indian-administered Kashmir. And the Indus Water Treaty, signed by both countries in 1960, gave Pakistan control of 80% of the river, but also gave India the power to utilise the remaining 20% in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, India uses the water for irrigation and has started multiple dam projects which could reduce the river's flow through to Pakistan. And as the two nuclear-powered nations grow in population, the need for both water and hydro-powered electricity continues to increase. Yet it's the Kashmiris who lose the most, both in lives and resources, and this only fuels their drive for independence. Now, there are as many as 20,000 people in Peterborough, almost a tenth of the population, who can trace their ancestry to the Kashmir region. Following the Indian government's move last August to abolish Articles 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution, the Kashmiri people have suffered from human rights abuse, including the blocking of access to communication. Many within the Kashmiri community of Peterborough have been unable to have contact of any kind with their family members or friends in Kashmir and are deeply concerned for their health and safety. Now, Paul, you spoke about Kashmir in your maiden speech.
I did.
In Parliament, and you were recently chosen as Vice Chair of the APPG on Kashmir. Why do you feel so strongly about the issues in Kashmir?
Because this is an issue purely about self-determination and human rights.
Yeah.
And because so many of my constituents can trace their ancestry back in Kashmir, growing up as a young man in Whittlesea and in Peterborough, I had many Kashmiri friends, like you will, and I began to learn a lot more about, the issues and where a lot of my classmates, my friends, my work colleagues were actually from.
Yeah.
And being an MP for Peterborough, I think I've got a duty to speak out on behalf of my constituents from that part of the world. And as I say, it's a simple issue for human rights. We all believe in human rights. And it's not just the lockdown that's happened since the Articles 35A and 370 were rescinded. It's the rape, the torture, the killings that go on in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And if I had family in that part of the world, then I'd feel very strongly about it too. And it's my duty to speak out on these issues.
What do you feel you can do to make a change here, Paul? I mean, how will the APPG bring about any change on an issue that, frankly, has been ongoing for 72 years, especially when Boris Johnson has said he has no intention of interfering? He said it's an issue between India and Pakistan.
Well, awareness of what's going on in Kashmir is incredibly low. I said to you a few seconds ago that going to school in this in Peterborough and having work colleagues in Peterborough, you can't help noticing this as an issue. Well, I think I did because I'm interested in politics and because I've always been a little strange like that. I'm actually interested in kind of world issues, current affairs and that sort of thing. But the number of people who are aware of what's going on in Kashmir across the country is incredibly low. Everybody knows what's going on in, say, Syria. I think a lot of people know what's going on in China with the Muslim minority, in China. Few people knew what was going on in Burma with the Rohingya Muslims there. But relatively few people know about this historic conflict, which Britain, by the way, as the former colonial power in India, have got a lot of responsibility for. And you say, what can we do? Well, I mean, first off, it's about raising that awareness. I've dedicated a significant amount of my time, as the MP for Peterborough, campaigning on this, putting down questions, very specific questions on leaders who have been imprisoned, relatively recently, as well as the, what are the government doing to resolve this. I've spoken to Dominic Raab about this, and I think there's an awareness challenge within government about how important this is. So as far as and how violent it could become and dangerous it could become, as you said earlier, this is two nuclear powers arguing over this part of the world. So it's really, really important. So that's what I can do, is I can raise awareness within Peterborough, within the country, by talking about some of these things, but I can also raise awareness within Parliament from both parties and within government.
But do you see this awareness leading to action by the government? This is the key question, isn't it, that people listening want to hear, is given the relationship that the current government has with the government, the BJP party in India. Do you see Britain intervening and helping here? Do you actually personally see that happening?
Well, I'm very concerned with what I consider to be the end of secular government, if you like, in India. It's becoming more of a nationalist government.
Yeah.
And I think that's bad for the world, actually, not just for the people of Kashmir.
Indeed.
And so I think there's an awareness challenge there about making sure that the government, this is not the Indian people, by the way, or India itself, this is the Indian government.
Of course.
So making sure that government are aware of what I consider to be quite a significant change within the governance of India. But it's all about stepping stones, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think we're going to see a situation through my work where we're going to, within almost immediately, see a solution to this problem. But what we can do is demonstrate on a very narrow area like human rights to show that what's happened with the revocation of Article 35A and 370, that this was wrong. The Indian government have been very sensitive about this and very, I think, almost immature sometimes about how they've handled this. You've seen what happened when Debbie Abrahams, the Labour MP, she recently went to India and joined by three of my Conservative MP colleagues, James Daly, Sarah Brickcliffe and Mark Eastwood, who are now actually, I think, in Pakistan, or certainly were very, very recently. Yeah. And to deny access to British MPs to India to discuss this, I think is a self-defeating move.
Yeah, I mean, she'd spoken out against the Indian human rights abuses in Kashmir, which is clearly why she wasn't refused entry. So you've talked about politicians, but the journalists and human rights organisations, you're saying they should be allowed in, right? These guys need to see on the ground the suffering of Kashmiris firsthand.
Well, we need to shine a spotlight on this part of the world and show the general people what's going on there. I hear sometimes you see some really great articles, sometimes in the Washington Post, sometimes here, with people looking at this and shining, as I say, shining that spotlight on it. And I think India, the Indian government, not India as a country, not the Indian people, but I think the Indian government need to be held to account, because they are going to be one of the world's biggest powers. Yep. They are going to be one of the world's biggest economies, but they need to be held to account, with what's going on, human rights abuses in their own country, in the same way that other countries are.
But obviously we all agree with your statement there, Paul. I mean, that's an obvious statement to make. But when I go back to the point when Boris Johnson said he refuses to intervene, where does that leave us? Because
I think there's a degree of, can I say, ignorance, not necessarily on the part, I'm not going to say the British government itself is ignorant of it, but I think there's a degree of ignorance about what's actually going on here. It's not a bilateral discussion between India and Pakistan. No. What about the people of Kashmir? What about the people, what about what they want? And if I can, in some small way, begin to change attitudes towards this amongst my parliamentary colleagues and within the civil service and within the government itself, then I think I've done a very, very good thing. I'll feel very pleased with my contribution.
Good. You've intimated this already, but I just want to drive home the point. Do you believe that Britain has a moral duty to make efforts to solve this issue as it was left unresolved by Britain in 1947?
Yes.
Direct answer. Simple.
Yes. Of course we do.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, I saw what Britain did in Burma.
Yeah.
With the forgive me, I can't remember her name, but the leader who was under political.
I also forget her name. I know what you mean.
Under house arrest by the military junta in Myanmar and in Burma. So when she was released with a huge acclaim. Yeah. And a lot of people had a lot of belief in what this lady was going to do and bring, I suppose, Myanmar out of the social isolation the political isolation that it created for itself. Yeah, yeah. And when she did become Prime Minister or President of that country, she continued to do unspeakable things to the minorities in the Rohingya Muslims from Bangladesh, and that's on the border area there. These Muslims, by the way, who supported Britain in World War II in the fight against the Japanese, and were quite often the thin line between winning and losing that war in Burma. And Britain had a moral obligation then, and it spoke out. Actually, I don't think it did far enough. No. It didn't do much, but it spoke out, and it quite often was a lone voice in the world about the rights of the Rohingya Muslims in that part of the world. It should do the same in Kashmir.
Agreed. So, Paul, how are you going to make sure that the government is on the side of justice and human rights rather than economics? This is a question that I was asked to ask. Yeah. And I'll leave that question as it is.
It's a great question.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's a great question. Britain has a fine tradition and a fine moral voice in the world about standing up for human rights and self-determination. And Kashmir is no different from any other part of the world where it does this. Now, trade, of course, is going to be important to this country. Trade with Pakistan, trade with India, trade with the developing world, beyond India and Pakistan. So these are obviously important. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to abuses in other parts of the world, then these must be paramount. In the same way we challenge China, sometimes unsuccessfully. We challenge China a lot of the time on their domestic rights. We should be doing the same for other countries. It should be a level playing field.
Indeed. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, Paul, and we've not had any calls, but we have got questions coming in on Facebook, which I'd like to put to you. So Karima's messaged in. She said, currently the Home Office are deporting BAME communities from Middle Eastern, Eritrean and Jamaican demographics. This could be seen to be targeting certain ethnicities and approving the racist and Islamophobic rhetoric. After the announcements of the Eritrean deportations, Regent's Park Mosque suffered a horrific attack today. Is this due to the encouragement of hostile behaviour towards people from diverse backgrounds? American criminals have not been put on planes. How is this policy justified?
Well, let's not link, please, anything we are discussing tonight, any of the policy issues, to what's gone on in the Finsbury Park Mosque today. We don't know.
Regent's Park
Mosque today. We don't know the reasons behind that attack or the motives behind that attack. Let the police do their job. Because as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've read so far, there's no suggestion that this is terror related. So let's just let the police do their job and find the motives behind this. As for the deportations of that Karima mentioned, I'm going to take a pretty unsympathetic view towards this, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Because these people who have been deported, as far as I understand it, have committed some of the most serious crimes you can think of. Often rape, sometimes manslaughter, and they've been served significant time in British prisons. And I think it's only right to deport criminals when they're not British citizens.
Okay. Very direct answer. Thank you, Paul. Ishfaqa said we should have more Muslims from different groups working with the government to come to an acceptable definition of Islamophobia. It will be difficult for the Muslim community to accept or adopt a definition which doesn't have our input. One, I agree with Ishfaq, and I'm sure you will as well. The current definition from the APPG had an abundance of Muslim input. So what are your thoughts on what Ishfaq has said?
Well, I agree with Ishfaq. I think, as I've said at length in the last discussion that we had, I think if we're going to get a workable definition of Islamophobia, if we're going to get a definition of Islamophobia which is respected in the same way that the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is respected, then we need to work with the broadest possible collection of faith groups, not just Muslims, but faith groups and other organisations across the country. And let's start that work now. The work is ongoing. The government's doing that work right now as we speak, and using the resources that it has to do that work. But let's start that work here in Peterborough. And I'm quite happy and keen, not quite happy, I'm very keen to be a focal point, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Muslim community in this city and other faith organisations to input into that work and making sure that we get that workable definition of Islamophobia with the broadest possible input. Okay.
The next question, more of a statement, but we'll see what your thoughts are. This is from Mohammed Muncher. He said, we need to look into the issue of Kashmir in the following context. Number one, the people of Kashmir are deprived of the right of self-determination promised by the United Nations. Two, because of this issue, both India and Pakistan are spending huge percentages of their GDP on defence. Therefore, people of Indian subcontinent are deprived of decent health, education and other public services. 3, nearly 1/5 of the world population is living under constant fear of nuclear conflict. Resolution to this conflict not only will improve lives of people in the Indian subcontinent, but also will better the rest of the world. In fact, the world will be less dependent on China as a manufacturing hub, hence tolerating its human rights abuses. Regardless of how India presents this to the world, it is a conflict, if not resolved, with international consequences.
I think Mohammed's nailed it. I mean, I think it would be far better that these two countries were spending far more of its GDP, of its money, on health, on education, on the all sorts of public services, support services,
Yeah.
than on arms, soldiers and bombs. I think he's completely nailed it. And he's absolutely right. The potential of the Kashmir region and the wider Indian subcontinent has not been reached. The potential of that part of the world is great. And if we resolve that conflict, then just think about what's possible in that part of the world. And a lot of the ancestral homes of my constituents.
More comments coming through. Thank you for that, Paul, by the way. More comments from Asif Rahman. He said, the issue of Kashmir is not about water control or some political and philosophical goal. It's a basic question of self-determination by the Kashmiris and of human rights. He goes on to say, the role of the MP is to raise the profile of the issue and the plight of the Kashmiri people. No one should expect miracles. To be fair, Paul Bristow has made a fantastic start towards achieving this. That's from Asif Rahman.
Well, thank you, Asif. I enjoyed that. Well, look, I mean, I made a lot of promises during the election that I would do this. And I think far too often politicians do make promises at election time and then those quietly go away during peacetime, if you like.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like that. I don't want to make a party political point, but traditionally, many of the Muslim communities in my city have voted traditionally for the Labour Party. And that, as far as I'm concerned, needs to stop. I think the Labour Party often take the Muslim vote in this city for granted. I will not. I made significant promises about Kashmir. I intend to keep them. I made promises about cleaning up many parts of our city, about lifting up parts of Millfield and parts of our communities here in Peterborough. And I made certain aspirations about where we can go as a city. I intend to deliver.
Okay. Ishfaq, who messaged earlier, said, we should not trade with any nation that propagates human rights violations. We need humanitarian aid agencies and independent observers to be allowed access to Kashmir. That is the first steps that must be taken. And we then, the Kashmiris must be given... Sorry, there's a spelling mistake here. I don't know what he's saying here. And then the Kashmiris must be given something and a referendum. There we go, and a referendum. And Faisal agrees with Ishfaq.
That's a really interesting point.
It is.
We've had some slightly controversial referendums in this country in the past. We had one, obviously, on our relationship with the European Union. I campaigned heavily for leave, and we had a leave result. And as a result of all the turbulence caused, political instability in this country caused by that referendum and a certain group of people not willing to honour the result of that referendum, I'm so proud that this government have honoured the result of that referendum when we've left the European Union. The same happened in Scotland when Scotland voted no to independence.
Of course.
The people of Kashmir were promised a referendum, I think in 1948, I think it was.
Right.
And I think they deserve the same rights to self-determination as the British people have and of the Scottish people have.
Yeah. Good point, Paul. A final comment here. Faisal Mahmood says, money and trade always seems to take priority. Look at trade with Saudi Arabia. That's Faisal's comment. Thank you for that. And Saj Yunus says, great show, listening with great interest. So we've got some feedback there, Paul, for the first show, which is good. I think I've got another question here. Okay, yeah, so this is going back to the Islamophobia point. Can you ask Paul, what does he think is wrong with the definition accepted by other parties of the APPG definition of Islamophobia? Do you mind just addressing that?
Well, I think what's fundamentally wrong with it is that it's not been broadly accepted. I listed quite a few people who had specific, concerns about it, who have not accepted it. It's not like the IHRA definition, other than a few cranks on the hard left. I think everybody accepts that, but not everybody's accepted the Islamophobic.
With respect, the question I think is asking, what do you think is wrong? You personally, what do you think is wrong with that?
Well, I think it comes from the purest of motives, and I listen to a number of voices on this, especially those behind the definition. And as I say, it comes from people wanting to like you and I, stand shoulder to shoulder against Islamophobia. But there are significant people who have problems with it. And so as a result of that, I think we should also listen to them because it hasn't had the same broad acceptance. And you're asking me, what do I specifically think that was wrong with it? Well, I mean, there are certain, I think, issues around being able to criticise Islamists, as a result of it, as far as I can read it. But, personally, I'm not going to read through this and think there's anything specifically wrong with the definition. All I see is very good people wanting to nail Islamophobia and stamp it out. But what's key, as I say to you, is ensuring that we get the broadest possible acceptance. It's not about watering it down. It's about using the government and all the resources that it has to ensure that everybody buys into this, and it's given the same credibility. That's the word I've been looking for throughout this discussion. Credibility that, say, the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism has. Because when it does, then you can see the people who will either accept it or won't, and then people can make their own judgment calls as a result of that, if it has that broad acceptance.
Okay, Kareem has come back after hearing what you've said about the deportation. And she says, the point I'm making is that due process and time to arrange defence is not being given to those under deportation orders to those countries. This has been criticised by the courts in the UK. The majority of people have got a criminal record, but not all. Some of the deportees were deported on the lack of a valid British passport, which many working class families can't afford. Due process should be given. This is only fair.
Well, that's not my understanding. My understanding is that the specific case that the Home Secretary has been challenged about, quite often by the Labour Party and others, is that specifically, I think quite a number of people from Jamaica have been deported. These people have committed some of the most serious crimes, as I said, manslaughter, rape, and I'm not going to apologise for this government wanting to deport people who've behaved so badly and so wickedly in the past.
Okay, she does make a point in her message of saying that not everyone had a criminal record. So what do you think about those that didn't have a criminal record and have been deported?
Well, I don't know about specifics. If they don't have a criminal record and they've been deported, then that's it. That obviously needs to be looked at. But as my understanding is that these people have been guilty of the most wicked crimes, as I say, including rape, including manslaughter, and I'm not going to apologise about a government who wants to deport people like that.
No, and no one would expect you to, and I would hope that that everyone listening would have that same opinion. That given those horrendous crimes you speak of, we would want those to be deported. But there is a huge amount of concern for those that have not committed a crime. And
I'm not. I'd be very willing to look at specifics where that's the case, but as far as I understand it, these are people who've served significant prison sentences for very, very serious crimes.
Okay, if you are listening, this is Ask Your MP, a brand new monthly show here on Salam Radio 106.2. Kindly Paul Bristow approached Salam Radio and said he'd love to do something where it could be more accessible, and he chose these topics today, and I believe he'll choose the topics each month. Today it was Islamophobia and Kashmir, as you can tell from the interaction that we've been getting. You have got about 2 minutes left. If you do want to sneak in a quick call and speak to Paul live on air, you can do that. 01733 602 133. I realise it's the first show. We're building traction, but if you feel brave, do call in. Paul, while we're waiting for that maybe elusive phone call, and we've got a couple of minutes left, how's it been going so far for you as our newly elected MP? How have you found it? Have you found your feet? Have you settled in well in Westminster? And what's your plan looking like?
This is the best job that I'll ever have. And I'm going to ensure that I take every opportunity that this job gives me to talk about the things that I care about. That includes, as we've talked about tonight, Islamophobia. That includes Assad Kashmir, but it also includes making sure people feel better about the city where I grew up, my city. And we were discussing just slightly off air a few minutes ago that I think sometimes Peterborough can be its own worst enemy. We've got so much going for us in terms of our history, our businesses, our transport links, and most of all, our people. Peterborough is a very, very special place, and people from Peterborough are very, very special people. But we need to talk much louder about that and much more proudly about that. You'll have seen some of the things I talk about as proud of Peterborough.
Indeed.
I want to take Peterborough on the road and make sure people down at Westminster, down at Whitehall, realise what a great city this is, and so we can get the investment and the levelling up agenda that this government's talking about here in Peterborough.
Fantastic, Paul. Thank you. Well, sadly, we are out of time for today for this first show. This has been Ask Your MP with Paul Bristow and myself, Amir Suleman, here on Salam Radio 106.2 FM. We're back again all being well, on the 19th of March, which is 4 weeks today, inshallah. So please do put it in your calendars and get involved as well. Don't be afraid to ask Paul those grilling questions yourself.
Can I just add one more thing?
Of course you can.
If people want to get a hold of me, they can do by just emailing me at paul@paulbristow.org.uk. But email me and tell me what you think I should be talking about on this radio show. We talked about Islamophobia and Kashmir today, but there are other topics too, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions that you have, Amir, but more importantly, what the public have.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for ending that very, very aptly. It's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Paul. Thanks for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Stay tuned to Salam Radio after this short ad break.